So without further ado, I'll invite Prof. Salvo, who will be moderating the session. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. We really appreciate it. I would like to invite the panelists to please sit with us. And let me very briefly give you an agenda, because I think we need one. And that will be, you can do musical chair also, let's put the music on. And the idea here is that I would like to inspire you and to merge with us in creating an interface on the dynamics of investing. And there is a lot around this. I think it's a lot like dating. You have assets, obviously, attractive or not, but you have personalities, you have chemistry, you have intangible things. And all of these things pan differently depending on the situation and the interaction. And this is why we have what I think are wonderful examples of this sort of dynamics. And I will let them introduce one by the time. Then I will ask them one question only, and then it's up to you. I really would like to have a discussion. And in the best outcome, this is the beginning, is a sparkle for a long life interaction where we can work together and get new things. Regarding me, it's going to take only 20 minutes. Regarding me, I'm in this position, I'm facilitating this conversation as the president of the Eureka Institute for Translational Medicine, which is a non-for-profit organization worldwide which aims at creating ecosystems locally, like here, now, to address unmet medical needs through research and education. We have many of these events, and please do come and talk to us, and we'll help catalyze. Thank you again. Now, can you introduce, please, yourself?
Hi, my name is Lawrence. So I work for EDBI, and for you who do not know EDBI, EDBI basically is the investment arm of Singapore Economic Development Board, right? So we broadly invest, so we invest globally, and I would say broadly across tech and healthcare, right? And within healthcare, I would say that we focus on digital health, medtech as well as precision medicine. And within precision medicine, we look for, new form of modality. So do you think about mRNA, CRISPR-based systems? We also look for opportunity in cellular therapy, yes, even up to digital therapeutics. So think about drug being prescribed, software being prescribed as a drug to treat certain conditions, right? And beyond the new form of modalities, we're also looking for the next breed of innovative companies today, biotech companies today. They are using AI, genomic data to really transform drug discovery as well as development, right? So these are the opportunities we are looking at. And perhaps, we tend to focus more on companies that are in the Series A onwards. So you think about companies who have passed a seed and probably post first institutional round, right? In terms of our portfolio, I would say in the healthcare space, about 25% of our portfolio are in healthcare, right? And I would say among the healthcare, half are in digital health. The other half is really in medtech and precision medicine.
Great. Good evening, everybody. My name is Vishal Doshi. I'm the founder and CEO of Biosciences. We are a Singapore-headquartered clinical stage oncology-focused biotech company. Bit of a background how started. Just before starting Biosciences, we did a private equity deal, which was $145 million. This was 10 years back. And the concept behind that was taking deprioritized assets from big pharma companies and taking it all the way until clinical proof of concept, which is the maximum value creation point. And we achieved a 50% success rate where 3 blockbusters were originated, one being Eribulin, second being Ontak, and the third one was Lenvatinib, which is currently treated as a blockbuster for first-line HCC drug. At our vision is very simple. We want to focus on democratizing, decentralizing, and de-risking R&D. As most of you might know, the biggest challenge with R&D these days is the cost of failure is way, way higher than the cost of success. Right now, it's 92% of the drugs that are getting developed are actually not making it to the market because they are getting failed. And oftentimes, you see that these drugs, which are actually not even getting past the proof of concept, there's nothing wrong with the science, but sometimes it's actually the clinical trial design and how you deal with the baby rather than telling the baby it's ugly, right? It's a different approach to it. And that's what OM is trying to do. OM comes with a group of team members that have significant amount of experience of dealing with situations like this, and at the same time looking at developing drugs in a more smarter and a more sophisticated manner. I call it a little bit more cerebral approach in nature. Right now, we currently have 2 drugs in our pipeline. First one actually comes from homegrown Singapore. We acquired that drug from A-Star. This was in 2018. We have made phenomenal progress with it right now. We are in phase 1, getting ready for a phase 2 program later this year, which would be a big milestone for Singapore as a country. And the second drug we acquired from an Irish company, but it was originated in Spain, which is again a first-in-class drug. So right now we are developing 2 first-in-class drugs. For most of you who might not know us, do follow us on LinkedIn because a lot of information comes on LinkedIn. We just made an announcement 2 weeks back at JP Morgan that we have signed a collaboration with an artificial intelligence company, and that makes us the only drug development private company in Singapore that has in-house artificial intelligence platform. And that makes us a very unique proposition for us to having a conversation with across different aspects, research institutes, pharma companies, and biotech companies as well, and investors, of course. So yeah, that's about me. Looking forward to having a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Kasia Suzor. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Ardion. As Vishal was explaining what they are doing, we're actually doing something very similar. So I was very encouraged to hear that that business model already got confirmed. In a nutshell, we focus on autoimmunity, and we are also clinical stage biotech platform. We develop immunotherapy and therapies of the next generation, therapies that are really based on the new understanding of how the immune system works. How we all got together, the story is very simple. A bunch of very, very passionate people about the fact that we are in we're living in an amazing times where we really converge the technology and healthcare coming together for the first time in that level, where we can learn much faster, when we can test our theories much faster. And with that comes big progress. That also means that the talent that we invite to the table and we are constantly looking for is very diverse. So we have top-notch scientists from all over the world that are part of our scientific advisory board. We have team coming from big pharma, really giving us all the expertise and their understanding of the current market dynamics. We have data scientists, we have artificial intelligence. Similar to what Vishal mentioned, we do believe that using technology to expedite what you're after, in the end really benefits the patients, which is why Ardion was created. We wanted to bring technologies that are ready, already here, and we just want to bring it into the hands of the patients. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Chiew. Before I introduce Heritas, where I come from, I do like to thank SG Innovate for having us. And frankly, I thought that this event would be cancelled, right? Because everyone is like cancelling events on all sorts of events. But I'm surprised all of you are here, and I almost do not see anyone wearing a mask, So that's the kind of confidence we have in Singapore kind of containment measures. Anyway, I just landed back in Singapore this morning. Okay, anybody getting nervous? Yeah. I actually came from Kuching, okay, where we actually own a hospital. But Kuching is not part of China, okay? It's part of Sarawak, okay, capital city of Sarawak, which is 1 hour flight away, and they have no confirmed cases at this point. So actually last night I was having dinner with the founding doctors of our hospital, and they were sitting 2 meters away from Singaporean team. so for a while, I mean, you feel like, Singaporeans are sort of the outcasts, in a neighboring country. Okay, so jokes aside, So I come from Heritas Capital Management. We run a few funds. We run a venture fund, we run a PE fund, and we also run fund of funds. Fund of funds means we actually invest in funds globally where they could be in various sectors that are of interest to us. So Heritas invests in education, healthcare, and technology. So these are the three industries that we like. Now, in the healthcare space, which I suppose most of us here will be interested in, we sort of invest across the whole spectrum, a very holistic view on what healthcare means. Okay, so as I mentioned, we invest in hospitals, we invest in clinics. So locally, we invested in a Q&M dental clinic. For those of you who have dental checkups at Q&M, you know that's the kind of clinics network that we invest in. We invest in digital health, so I learned a lot from Lawrence. We also invest in biotech specifically. So we also do diagnostics and even food tech or health food tech, health food delivery. So our investments in healthcare space span across Asia mostly, from China to Southeast Asia, and I mean we are looking also at global biotech funds to be our partners, beyond Asia. So this is a nutshell of what Heritas look at. Thank you.
Or I can sing also, no problem. So many thanks for your introductions. So the way I would like to get started is by offering one question each in order to frame the discussion, and then it's really up to you. And let's start with Lawrence. Lawrence represents EDB, represents the government arm of investing. So he has a crucial role in shaping the landscape of the future for biotech in Singapore and beyond, because Singapore is a high-tech hub in the largest market untapped in the world. So my question to you is, can we think of EDB and the entity you lead as a traditional VC, as a VC on steroids, or as something else? What are the special things and what are the common things?
I think first and foremost, I think I would also like to take the opportunity to share a bit about, beyond the VC part, just look at the government support, looking at, space in Singapore, this space in Singapore. And I would like to say that, when you say government, it's not one single body, but you think about it's actually made up of many different bodies or agencies, right, with different agendas and objectives. But all worked closely together and in a more general and coordinated manner. So in the case of EDBI, I think we are just one of the many local actors looking to foster innovation in Singapore, right? So that's one. Second thing here is that if you think about government support, I'll break down into probably two categories. I think one is you're looking at grants, and the second is equity investment, right? So in the form of grants, I think some of you who are looking at forming your own startups, and also looking at commercialization, there's a lot of grants available in the government agencies. Take for example, ESG, right? Or gap funding, right, from ESG as well, NTU, NUS as well. I think there's also clinical trial grants from National Medical Research Council. There's a lot of acronyms in Singapore. And then beyond the grant side, I think one thing I want to make a distinction is that the way you look at grants and equity are different. Former is really, there's no return expectation, but the latter, yes, right? So therefore, I come to equity investment. So in equity investment, I think there are probably three government-linked funds. Of course, you have ESG Seeds Capital, right? The second is really SG Innovate, as you mentioned. The third on NRE funding, and third is EDBI, right? And EDBI, I will put it as a different category where we tap our funding not from EDB, but really from the Ministry of Finance. And over there, we actually, so coming back to us, the way we look at equity investment, I think there's two mandate that we are bound under. I think first, financial returns, right? So that when we look at investment, we have to make sure that will produce a return that we want, because there's a hurdle rate we need to meet. Second is then, as part of the investment, what sort of strategic benefit do we bring back to Singapore? So that is a strategic side. So when we look at investment, and of course, I think the often question I encounter is, do we see one override the other. The often question is, my answer is definitely no. What we look for is, first, must make money. And then among the make money part, we're looking for those that we think it makes sense where Singapore can play in, right? So that's more on the EDBI perspective. And I would like to say, for us, once again, I want to mention about the different agency, because you think about EDB is really, we'll say, outside in. So looking at attracting companies to come to Singapore, set operation, creating capabilities, right? ESG is really got inside out, right? Helping local companies go and scale and then grow global. We work with both agencies, even though we may come from EDB families, but we work with all agencies. On the tech side, we work with IMDA as well. So I would like to see it as a whole of government approach, right, when we look at supporting companies. And then in terms of stage, earlier I mentioned we invest slightly, I would say Series A onwards. We don't do seed. And over there, I think ESG has a very good co-investor program where they work with funds like Heritas, right? And the way they think about it here is that they will take, perhaps share a bit of their upside, potential upside, in return for private VCs to really invest in companies locally, right? Yeah, so I think that's all. Thank you.
I would like to ask Chiew a different question in the same area. I do not know your life, but I can guess it. You have a desk, and somebody keeps piling on it proposals from startup. Each of them has first-in-class cure for cancer and anything else. So this is a lot of background noise in your life. How do you filter it? What are the things which make you give an interview versus not?
Have you been stalking on me? Yeah, actually, Prof is correct, right? For the sad lives of investors is that everyone thinks that you have lots of money, and lots of proposals will come through different means, from the LinkedIn to the emails, to phones and dropping into our websites and things like that. So, but I must say that if I take a step back, it shows a vibrant scene. So sorry. Yeah, it shows a vibrant scene in the biotech development, right? I think very kudos to people like Lawrence, EDB, ESG, SG Innovate, and a lot of angels and the VC funds. The ecosystem today is so much more vibrant. Thank you. Yeah, the ecosystem today is so much more vibrant, right? And we have a lot of returning PhDs, whales from overseas, and so on and so forth. So yeah, the whole ecosystem of not just research, which I think the first, from 2000 onwards, is a big drive on pushing research. But the subsequent 10 years, the last 10 years, a lot more drive pushing on commercialization and startup formation. So, I'm very grateful for how the ecosystem has evolved. I think let's not take away that historical perspective that in about 10, 20 years of investing in research and now commercialization, we are seeing all this coming. So I'm not complaining about seeing more and more deal flows. The question is, how do we respond, right, to these things? Now, even today, very candidly, if you have a biotech startup idea or a proposal, now I can count with my fingers, right, how many funds or how many friends, families, you can always find, right? You have your own circles. But if you want to look for VC support and funding at your early stage, it is not easy. You probably can count with your fingers, right? How many have such track record of investing? Not even to say they have exited, right? How many serial entrepreneurs are there who have built up their biotech company and exited, right? Our ecosystem is still new and young after 20 years. Okay, so maybe another 30 years, it will be very different. But it's a good effort. So what, for us, VC people do when we see all this, for me, is a very simple answer. I direct it to my team, right? So as my emails come in my inbox, it flows out like a post office, goes to my team, some of whom are sitting here. They have PhDs, they are very smart people, right, who can look at the technologies and come back to me and say, okay, these are the views on the science, right? Because end of the day, for me, at least for us, right, in biotech investment, it's very difficult to have really momentum play, right? like people invest in e-commerce, for example, right? You have seen, you know, you just keep growing in your, you know, the merchandise sales growth and so on. This one you can't see anything. It's a science, right? The coronavirus, I can't see it, right? But it is there, right? So things like this are harder. You need the science assessment. So for us, we choose to invest in what we believe to be the novel, good science, okay? And then we focus on eventually on the potential commercial outcome, right? Addressable market, for example, right? The third lens that we put on would also be that, hey, does this do any good, right? Frankly speaking, we have invested in 2 oncology biotech companies. But sometimes I do pause and ask myself, you know, oncology is a heavily invested area, right? And the truth is also that that's because there's a lot of money in it, right? But that's not the only kind of big problems in the world, right? So sometimes I do make myself and my team think, right, beyond oncology, what other areas shall we put bets on? Because, you know, we want to make productive use of fundings, right? So I do sympathize, you know, with Lauren's view sometimes on how you do trade-offs, right? You want to make money, yes. He wants to serve Singapore's economic development needs, whereas my investors also want to have an impact, right, on some of the less Cat4, lower profile kind of diseases. So for us, it's always an algorithm in our heads running, so which are the areas we want to place bets on. Yeah, so, and of course, when my team, who are better qualified than me, assess that it is good science, then we go into assessing the market, and then we go into assessing the terms, the team, and so on and so forth. So I think this kind of thought process is not unique to Heritas. It's pretty commonly used within the institutional investor scene. So we are no different, right? But at the end of the day, I must say, maybe every 100 proposals we get, you know, we might only have the bandwidth to talk to 5 or 10, unfortunately. And out of the 5 to 10, the progress to the next stage might well be the 1 or 2, right? So that is the kind of the work life that we live. Okay, yeah. So I don't be too envious of our lives. You know, it's better to be in the lab sometimes. Thanks.
Thank you for a wonderful answer. Vishal, now that I get to know your story a little bit more, I find it fascinating. I think that, and you can tell it much better than me, you are investing not just your time, not just your creativity, but even your own resources. There is no testimony to believing in what you do more than that. How did it resonate in the early days when you needed the money and it was difficult to convince? How difficult it is to transmit the value of something new?
Does this work? Can I? Yes, please. So that's a, as I would put it, $1 million question, right? Yeah, that's a $1 million question. I think to Chiew's point, the first point is always about science. Irrespective whether you have $200 million or you have $1 billion, you need to believe in the science, right? And to answer your question, how did it go about when I was starting out? It was all about just talking to the right people. So believe it or not, the first thing when I was starting up the company, the first thing I did was picked up the phone, called a few people that have been in the industry with me for a long, long time. The thing with biotech, you can't do it alone. You need a very strong team of people who have done it before and who are going to take you along the journey. So the first call I made was to my chief medical officer. We were both in quintiles together. I know exactly how he thinks. I know exactly how he goes about his science. So, when you slowly and steadily start pulling a strong team together, you are checking a very big box in an investor's mind. At least that's what I feel, because your bet in biotech is mainly on people and then science, because the people are the one who invest in the science at the end of the day. So that was the first approach that I always would recommend any biotech who wants to start. Just build a strong foundation in form of a team, and that team will make the right decisions for you. And that's how I went about it. The second was really, and this is where I think Singapore has done a fantastic job supporting the local ecosystem. What I mean by that is, I still remember having that first conversation with someone in A-Star. And they came to know about me because I knew them from my previous years. I sat down with them, and they knew that I was starting up Biosciences. They said, why don't you go and talk to someone in Accelerate? They have a few technologies for licensing. And believe it or not, that actually helped move things a little bit faster than I expected. So it was, again, communicating with the right people. And that really helped on that angle as well. On the funding piece, that's always a challenge, right? That's always a challenge. And especially, I can tell you that me and my co-founder, we come with a background of exiting $145 million private equity deals into $2 billion and building blockbusters. And that was still a challenge with a lot of investors in Singapore. So the dilemma was, we being a Singaporean company, where do I put my money, right? Because if I go to US, they tell me that you have to be a US company for me to invest in. If I stay in Singapore, the conversation would be, where can we get the additional money from? So there's always a balance that needs to, and at least what I've learned in the first 2 years of the journey is be prepared to take the hit. Don't go in the first month and the second month and the third month thinking that you are going to get a blank check from someone. As simple as that, because if you don't have enough skin in the game, the investors will not trust you. And just one additional point on what Chiew mentioned, apart from the team, the science, the more you work in the industry, everybody will realize it's about relationships. If you do not know and if you don't build relationships with the right investors, if you are not adding value to them, there's going to be a very little chance that they are going to add value to you by even investing. Does not matter they invest $100 million or $200 million. So it's really about you creating value for the investor, because at the end of the day, they are reporting to someone that they need to make money out of it as well. So those were the 3 or 4 things that I always thought. It's just building a very strong team that builds a good foundation. Let the team, give the team enough decision-making power to find the right science. Let the science do the talking on that. Third point, take the hit. It's okay. Take it on the chin and let it go for a couple of years, and then people will start trusting you. And the fourth one is building relationship with the investors. And slowly and steadily, you will start seeing things moving on that.
So first of all, thank you. One of the beautiful things in terms of vibes is that they are not afraid of opening up. They're talking about feelings, not just rationality. And I think this is a gift which they're sharing with us, and I'm very thankful. Kasia, you are the CEO of a startup which has a pipeline phase 2B ready, and you are in the midst of raising funding. So your experience is quite different than his in terms of stage. So since you started, he's talking about taking, being punched on the shin many times. Has your perception of the experience you are having changed? And how are you adjusting with it? And where do you find the resilience?
Well, where do I start? First of all, we are a little bit of a weird creature at Ardion, because we are startup by definition, but we have phase 2B ready asset that potentially can impact 1% of global population. That's autoimmunity altogether. So me, in a very naive way, I thought, how amazing is that? Why not everybody wants to be part of that journey? And I was very wrong. So that's really how the whole passion for healthcare, yet the reality very quickly course-corrected my thinking. And then one of my mentors said to me, look, in building a company, the reality is struggle is guaranteed, success is not. And it's only then, if you going day after day, when you hear no, where you hear maybe, or polite, let's see in the future, which basically stands for no, how do you keep going? The only thing that keeps me going is really the reason why we started the company to start with. So, which is really all about the patients and the fact that everybody on my team, we all believe that having the opportunity to bring all of our very different skill set that we have developed so far, but also the skill set that we will develop in the future, and we put it all together to really impact humanity for the better, I think there's the best gift. Now, what keeps me going? Most of the time, it's a lot of coffee every day, so I'm overly caffeinated a lot. But jokes aside, two things really. One is the people who I work with. I work with an amazing group of people. Every day we meet, just because of the space we're in, I keep meeting people who devoted their life to better humanity, really. And I do know that we are going after moonshots. And the chances of us succeeding are a little bit higher to where we were when we started, but we are still, the odds are against us. Now, when you have that conviction that even knowing all that, you can still wake up in the morning and be grateful that you're doing something you're super passionate about, I think that's a winning formula. So the people that I work with, and the second P, quote unquote, that keeps me going are the patients. Every time we hear a no from investors, that's really what is playing on my mind. I'm thinking, I know why I decided to start that company. I know why all the people who joined us along the way over the now 2-year journey joined forces to bring Ardion forward. It was all for the same reason. So really, that was the thinking. I wanted to share one more thing, because as Vishal was sharing his experience from fundraising, I changed my approach quite a lot, and that really came from, for full disclosure, I still remember my very first pitch to investors, and I'm so embarrassed by it. I really wish it never happened. Yet, it was probably the best thing that could happen back then, because they were super kind. Thank God they were, without quoting what the company was, maybe at some point they will allow me to say, but they were very kind and very candid with their feedback. And that really gave me enough power to say, okay, I know I'm not there yet, but I work hard to get there as a company, to bring more people on board, to bring the right ecosystem, to really move forward the science that we are developing. And again, being in a clinical stage is really, really exciting. So that's one, being embarrassed by my first pitch. I still think about it quite a lot every time I speak to investors now. The second thing I would say, and that's somebody who is a great, I call it angel to our company, a great advisor, and he said to me that the space we're in, biotech in general, really it's called, especially in the US, the term is hard tech. Hard because it's not easy, but the hard comes from the fact that by definition, we're gonna take a lot of time to develop something, and there is no guarantee that we will actually develop it. However, the flip side of it is you can take all this time, but when it works, you have zero risk of market adoption. So it's kind of a pros and cons of would you rather build a technology play that is also very needed, or spend years and years of focus and dedication and bringing the right people on board to really develop something that has 1% chances of success, then I think everybody should answer that question.
Amazing, thanks. And I got 2 pages of questions. So I read very fast, and I'll try to consolidate some, and I'm sure I will not offend anyone if I cannot ask all the questions, right? And the idea is, again, to establish a dialogue, even outside of this. So let me consolidate some questions and some people who answer. For the two of you, for the 2 VCs, if I can name you this way. The question is, what are the key attributes for the infamous elevator pitch? I'm stuck with you on the elevator, 7 floors, and I have to sell you my company, my idea. So quick.
I promise this is not the question from me, but I'm really curious.
Actually, I'm sorry to... Door open. Frankly, there is really no need for an elevator pitch. right? Honestly, I mean, here, since you bothered to come in the midst of a coronavirus kind of crisis, I will share with you very candidly, right? There is really no need for elevator pitch because the science and the commercialization is impossible. If you could convince someone, in an elevator speech, my typical answer, and I like to think you will do the same as me, right? Is that I will listen, right, throughout the whole elevator journey. And my answer is usually, can you send me some materials? Okay, here's my name card, here's my email, here's my phone number. By all means, send over, right? Because this is not simple, selling, plasticware on the street, right? So if we are serious with you, I got to look at the science. Right? How do you explain your science in 1 minute? I mean, people spend years trying to do things, right? How do you? It's an insult to think that in 1 minute I form a decision, right? That's an insult to you. So I think to me, more importantly, is that we could have proper follow-up, proper assessment, and my life, right? If we get 100 proposals, right, we can take a quick look, and then in our minds we screen, right? Okay, this one we will proceed further. I like what some of our startups are sharing because actually as investors, we also want the biotech companies and startups to succeed in Singapore. We know we can't fund everyone, right? But if for some, we sort of look at it and say, oh, I have seen this before, right? And if I can give you a word of suggestion to say, hey, this is something you might want to do to be better positioned for funding in future. If I could say something like that to you, it may not be a check, but it is also maybe useful advice, right? So that you can be ready. But there are also, I admit, there are also many others, I look at it and say, I don't know how to help you, okay? That's the truth, right? But for those that we look at it and say, oh, we invested in this space before, I spoke to someone before on this area, we have pattern recognition in our minds, and we look at it and say, yeah, maybe this one you might want to, pivot a little bit, or your pitch is this or that. Right? And this is free advice. So if you are a startup, try to get that moment where you say, can I send these things to you? And can you take a look, right? And after all, if you get a reply, if it is no, so what, right? But if it is, okay, like giving some feedback to how things may go, that is already invaluable. I always do this thought experiment. I say, if let's say with the biotech entrepreneurs that we have seen, and you live 1 day of my life, and I live 1 day of your life, right? How would we do things differently, right? And you might come out with a realization or say, oh, wow, these guys, really had a tough life, right? And I think it's a mutual, conclusion, right? Yeah, but please don't think of the elevator pitch. It's very common for tech companies, and the way tech companies do elevator pitch, oh, I am the Luckin of Indonesia, okay? I'm the Alibaba of South Africa. Okay, that is elevator pitch, okay? But for biotech, how do you do that, right? I think it's really tough, I'm sorry, right? But this is a sector where many of you spend so many years doing, it's just so different. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think totally agree. I mean, it's definitely not a consumer internet company. And I think when we look at it, a lot have to do with the science and team, right? So I don't think you can evaluate the science in 1 minute, right? You have to pour through the tons of data, clinical data that you have, and you look at the team. But I would say, first impression matters, right? Because investors need to find entrepreneurs we would like to work with, because there's a lot of heavy lifting, and we see this like a lifetime marriage, right? So to me, first impression and the chemistry must be there. If it's not, then to us, it's actually difficult. But beyond that, if you get over that, then it's really is the data and who are your advisors? Do we know them? And for us, we tap globally on our advisors, right? In terms of knowing what are first of all, you have to understand whether your science part, what you are trying to develop here, is it novel? Or is there competing stuff out there? So these are all things that we do. And I think it will take time. It takes time, yeah.
Thank you. So I hereby declare officially the elevator pitch dead. However, I just would like to sprinkle a little bit, also listening to the two startuppers, which is the chemistry story. You don't give typically your phone number to somebody you meet in the elevator if you really hate him or her, right? So there is a component of a chemistry, of instinct, which perhaps should be taken into account. But the elevator pitch is that. So now let's be fair and have the startuppers answer. I have consolidated a couple of questions, which essentially focus on the same thing. In your experience, let's say that you are a scientist or an entrepreneur scientist who wants to declare to the world of investors, I'm here. What are the first steps? In your experience, what are the first important steps?
How do I put it? So it's again to the point, it's more like matchmaking, right? The investors need to know you are there, and we need to know where the investors are. For me, what I would feel to both Waichu's and Lawrence's point, it ultimately comes down to science. When does not matter if you have good relationship, they can sit down, have long conversations. They always will want to see whether the investment is worthy in terms of science. I think what is very important is how you message to your approach and the vision. And if I can share a story, I think there was one conversation I had with someone in Boston 18 months back. And there was a very simple question this investor asked me. What is your vision? And as they say, there's a guy called Guy Kawasaki who makes a very good point. If you're not able to explain your vision in 5 words, that vision is not worth it, right? You are supposed to explain your vision in 5 words. And I actually prepared that way. When I go and talk to investors, if I'm not able to explain it in 5 words, the investors have enough things on their table. It's not an elevator. It's literally 5 words, right? So you can reach the first floor by then. But to your point is, how does the investor know that we are there, and how do we know that the investors are, that the right investors are there as well? It's really about messaging your science. I cannot emphasize this enough, but in the last 2 years, if there is something that I've learned, is a lot of people come to us, and not just me, a lot of the team members that I have, and they tell everybody that Om is doing such a fantastic job in LinkedIn. But initially, it was a shock to me. In the first 2 or 3 months, it was a shock to me. But then slowly and steadily, I started realizing a lot of people are looking at LinkedIn. A lot of people are looking at what your science is, your data, your posters, your publications. Where is it going? Is it going to the right KOLs? Is it going to the right support? Is it the brand? Is it John Hopkins? Is it Dana-Farber? All these communication points are very crucial. And I think that's one of the ways of attracting someone's interest. That does not take away from what a founder and a CEO has to do. It's just hustle. That should never stop. The data cannot replace hustle. Hustle cannot replace data. It has to go hand in hand.
So for me, the beginning was a little bit different. When we initially, myself and my co-founder, started talking about bringing that science in the hands of the patients, from that initial conversation, I then went into 6 months of very, very solid research to understand what else is out there, who is developing what, how do we position ourselves, because it's not only commercially, obviously we need it to be commercially sound, but also I'm thinking if somebody is coming up with something that might be potentially better, healthcare is still my industry, but we might as well focus on some other science. So first 6 months was talking to anybody who was in that space, who was willing to talk, and I reached out to a lot of people, probably 50-50 success rate when it comes to taking my call or giving me 30 minutes of their time. So that was the very first thing I did. 6 months hardcore research, and then also thinking, who do I need from the ecosystem, short term, meaning immediately, and then in the long run, to be either somewhat linked to my company or at least knowing what we're doing. And it's a little bit to your point about how do I communicate the message and who do I engage from the very beginning, just telling them the big dream that we have. So first was research, then finding potential people who can join us on that journey. Then we founded the company in Singapore, so that was 6 months. And then when the company was started, we really initially went deeply into, for quite a while we were fully self-funded. So we went into doing, there was a lot of work to be done from the legal perspective, from regulatory understanding, the scientific path that we want to take, what needed to happen and how we go around it. And then only with all that being in place, we decided to start talking to investors. And like I said, the first investor conversation was horrible. And then fast forward 7 months, when we got our first term sheet, I couldn't believe. Because you kind of go into that mode of, you meet a lot of people, different responses. So when the first term sheet came in, we were just super happy. Everybody on the team was really, really excited that we finally felt like all the work we put in is now coming together, because we are also very honest with our investors, and this is, maybe I would just add to the point of, from the startup founder perspective, I'm looking for people who, yes, they are after commercial gain. Like I said, as a co-founder of a company, I want Ardion to be very financially healthy, since we're in a healthcare. So financial health is also very important, so we can take care of the team and we can take care of the future pipeline. But I needed people who understand and believe in our vision, but also can give a lot of input into how do we navigate different avenues of the business that we're in. So it was a little bit of the kind of, if you like, my dream investors are the one who believe in what we're doing and they understand the intricacies of developing science like we do. So that's one. Two, understand the risks. Three, come with funding, but also come with know-how that we can jointly develop it for many years to come. Because I think it was Lawrence who mentioned that, when you bring investors on board, or as an investor is investing in a startup, we really join forces for a long time. And I call it our extended family, because no matter what, we can bicker and we can have disagreements on different subjects, but in the end, the next day we have to show up, we have to do the work, and we need to do it in the way that we all enjoy it. So it's a very long answer to a very short question, but that would be just my takeaway from the fundraising exercise.
Many thanks. Now, I don't believe in democracy, but I will bow to it. So we have a question which is very popular, and which I'll summarize. Don't break your necks. And I will paraphrase a little bit. So how important is the pedigree? And specifically, how officially recognized such pedigree is? Do you look at the genius with the certificate of PhD, MD, and blah, blah, blah? How relevant is the science as long as the progression toward product goes? One of the common myths, in my opinion, from a scientist standpoint, is that we know it all, and without us, nothing will happen. And I couldn't disagree anymore, but I leave it to the experts.
So I'll start first. I think this is a very interesting question. Of course, I think in general, you think PhD, domain expertise, all this is important, right? But so first of all, the science has to work, right? You need to have data to prove the science. So let's get that over. To me, the more important is the mentality of the founders, right? Because the way I look at it, that's why I say first impression counts. Why? Because the first impression I'm trying to get is that, are you really motivated, driven to make this work? You're looking for the iron in the person. Because trying to run a startup is not easy, especially in the healthcare space, right? I mean, you could just do a consumer internet and you can scale much quicker. But healthcare is tough, right? So the iron is important. Second thing here is that the scalability of your mentality, right? Because if you are just very scientific and you're just believing on this, the question here is, as you scale, you need more people, right? And you need people with different types of domain expertise and knowledge, and you need to lean on them. That means you must learn how to trust and dedicate. I'm looking for people who have the mentality to switch, and then because you can't be it's tough to be a CEO across all stages and think you can manage every single thing, which is just not possible. So I'm looking for the scalability of that mentality. Yeah.
So just one point to think about. Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, all the three founders were dropouts. Right? And to Lawrence's point, exactly, it was not the degrees that they got, but it was just the vision that they had to change the world, right? It's really about, to your point, I totally agree with you, it's the first step is really whether the person does he know, he or she knows what he wants to do with the company in the next 7 years, in 10 years. And if the answer is what you have in your mind is scalable enough, that's a good start. But yes, degrees, there is no replacement to it. Right? It definitely helps, because at the end of the day, you will need those people who will deliver on that work. I don't know if anybody saw this, but Tesla, Elon Musk just put out a note out there that does not matter if you have a degree, does not matter if you're a graduate or an undergraduate, come to Tesla, I'll hire you. Because he needs people, right? He will do all the work that needs to be done. So at the end of the day, yes, degree is very important, and especially in healthcare. But when you're talking about founders and the co-founders, it's, to Lawrence's point, is very important as well.
Well, I would only add from very briefly, I think ideally we should have both. So the pedigree, if you like, yes, it's a lot of titles and a lot of letters after the surname. But what it represents to me is that somebody spent years of their life developing something, not really knowing what the outcome might be. And that's what I'm looking for when it comes to people we bring into the company. That, again, we are in a hard tech space, so the fact that you can focus on a problem and don't quit because it's difficult, you just take a break and then you come back to the development and you don't stop. I think this is what the persistence of a scientist with pedigree shows. Now, if this is enough, absolutely not. There's so many different skill sets that, especially I think in this day and age, running a business, what is needed, and that's why I think Vishal mentioned, it's really in a healthcare space, you rely on people. Your key assets are is the science and the people, and they are equally important. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, thanks. I think a lot has been said. I'll just add that end of the day, I think we need to be fit for purpose, right? A team that is fit for purpose. I don't think there is a Superman who can do, who understand the science and can do the commercialization and can oversee the clinical development, regulatory approvals, and and run the company. I think it's very rare to find Superman like this, but for the appropriate stage where the companies are at, there are priorities, and the key is to be able to find that there are complementary skill sets in the team that we are investing in, or it is possible to find these people to complement the founder, right? For example, if we look at, we invested in a Series A company, preclinical, right? And, scientists, good science validated by big pharma clients and so on. And then, of course, then we look at it and say, okay, very good for this current stage. What about the next stage, right? So we are keep thinking forward the next 5-10 years, because there's a kind of time horizon you need to think for drug development, right? So to Laurence's point earlier, yeah, these founders got to be able to, sort of grow with the job, right? With the task at hand. But if he or she has shown that he's building up a team to plug these future gaps that could surface, I think that is very good, right? But yeah, at early stage, it's also unrealistic to expect that, wow, I got a full-fledged team in place. Then you get worried because your burn will be very high, right? That's why I say complementary skill sets for stage-appropriate needs, and then it evolves over time, yeah. So, and I would just add, let's say, some founders sold their company to a big pharma, for a few $1 billion, right? And they start another company, right, in another new novel areas. Now, if you were me, right, you also say, well, maybe I should take a second look. What are they doing, right? Why? Because these people had a track record. Simple, right? So versus 3 dropouts from university and say, okay, we were drinking in the bar yesterday and then we came out with this idea, which, they are, right? It could be the next, Kite or Juno, right? You never know. But I'm just saying that between spending time and bandwidth and effort, you make your call, right? If you were me.
Thank you. Now, still in full respect of democracy, I will put together two questions. The top one and then, where is the top one gone? Anyways, so there were a few questions related to ecosystem in Singapore. And there is, I can also share my experience, but I moved from San Diego because Singapore offers much more in terms of opportunities to go from idea to development. However, there may be a perception, notice the conditional tense, that the ecosystem, actually the framework is still fragmented, that not everybody knows what is available, and the various pieces are not necessarily coordinated. That is one part. The other part is expertise, not much in terms of science, but in much more in terms of executives who have done successfully exactly this, to take a startup and bring it to success. So the questions, summarized, I hope I'm doing it right, are what is going on? And while, of course, the two VCs are the main targets, also what is your experience in finding, for instance, executives, or in knowing all the wealth of things which Singapore offers? And for fairness, we start from the other end.
Sorry, can you just clarify your question a bit? I was,
So, in short, there are many opportunities offered in Singapore by the government and privately to develop startups. There are, however, gaps in the flow, gaps even of knowledge, entrepreneurs not knowing that certain resources are available, and there are gaps in terms of people, in particular executives, not the scientists, who can run this. So how do you integrate, and what is the future?
wow, that is really a tough challenge, and yeah, please forgive me if I sound like really an old man, because I always look back at the past 20 years when I was a young government official at EDBI and looking at industry development. I was based in New York, knocking on the doors of many life science and pharmaceutical companies, encouraging them to come to Singapore. That's like 20 years ago, right? And then we moved from manufacturing to research. And then I spent time at A-Star trying to form new ventures and that will interest investors. And then I crossed the table and I was a VC evaluating all these spin-offs and startups. I have to say, compared to 20 years ago, a lot of things are happening. Now, these gaps that we talk about, yes, they are still troubling. They are still restraining our realization of our full potential. It's all true, but it is a work in progress. So I think we always look at glass half full or half empty, right? So if you look back the past 20 years and comparing the kind of ecosystem development, I say, well, it's a half full, right? We should be proud of the progress. But we compare, a few of us are at JP Morgan, and we look at the depth of the systems in the US, right? It's like, oh man, we are so far away still, right? And even China, that in the past 5 years where we started investing in Chinese funds and Chinese companies as well, because of the big market there, and their innovation has also, surpassed many other countries in Asia and even Europe, and maybe only second to the US, okay? So, to us in Singapore, we look at the ecosystem, we have made good progress, but we also see there's a long way to go. All the issues that are highlighted by Professor is very real, right? And I think that you just have to work on these things step by step by step. Now, challenge, okay? Will there be a health tech or a biotech unicorn in Singapore? Okay, there were times when there were Singapore biotech companies that were individually in past history could be like on the way there or even there, right? But we have not seen that very sustainable example, shining example. Those of you who are Singaporeans will know that there is a creative technology, but you dated yourself, right? But if you think about it now, we have Grab and we have all these unicorns. But my personal challenge is, will our ecosystem now, as we speak, as it evolves today, and next few years, will we be able to support a good company, right? A good company with good science background, commercialization ability, and ability to grow, right? I'm not like too hung up on unicorn status, like for the ICT sector or TMT sector. But I think that if companies are strong and healthy in the biotech, in science and commercialization, then by right it should emerge. So I asked myself and my ex-government colleagues, hey, where are the critical gaps that we could potentially address, and then put the effort around. Financing, increasingly across all stages, are more available. Right? Business development people, people who can bring through commercialization, I think is still a bit lacking, right? And that is only because Singapore has invested more in the research phase, the science phase, 10 years prior to investing more in the commercialization phase. But I think the gaps will slowly catch up. Now, finally, and a few of our companies that we invested in, end of the day, I think they will increasingly have to build up some operations in the US. And so be it. Right? If that is the way to tap into the biggest markets, whether it's China or US, and the science could have been here, but the commercialization and getting to market may well be outside of Singapore, purely because of Singapore's market constraints. I think that is the next challenge that potentially we can help to tap and access qualified manpower to bring these companies to the next stage. Otherwise, the valley of death is very real, right? And I think that's what keeps me awake at night for the biotech investments that we have put money in.
That keeps me up at night as well. Thank you. I'm glad that we're sharing that insomnia. So I would just say, from our perspective, when we started fundraising, one of our advisors, who is in Europe, he said, well, in Singapore, and this is his perception of the ecosystem, you have maybe a handful of VCs that you can target because of your stage of development, because of the early stage when it comes to funding of the company. So that wasn't very encouraging when I heard this. Is that my experience? Yes and no. I would say probably the more known, if you like. There's definitely more than a handful, but I think it's also more and more healthcare groups are coming together to really look for where's the gap in the healthcare space, because commercials aside, I think the people who are coming together for the right reasons, and they do see that there's rates of certain diseases in the world, they do understand that if we tackle it in the right way, the commercials will follow, so they don't worry about that. So from the investments perspective, I would say for the early stage, it's not as gloomy as I think the, if you like, the stereotype goes. So my experience was much better on that. However, I've been also told, and this is from number of founders of startups in Singapore in the biotech space, when they said, for us to get more funding, we were forced to go to the US because you have much larger pool of investors and different people that you need in your ecosystem to tackle. I think partially it comes from purely the size, obviously, but I think Singapore is really catching up big time. So I wouldn't be very discouraged. I also, the fact that we are sitting here at SG Innovate and we have that conversation, I think clearly shows that the government wants to support the ecosystem. And it's really, it's all about how do we make it work together. We always say, I'm not trying to convince anybody on the other side of the table I'm right or wrong. I'm just hoping we can sit on the same side of the table and tackle the same issue together. So that's bigger picture. Personally, I also think blaming the ecosystem on failing or not developing far enough, I think is wrong. And I do believe that if we do the work good enough, the money will come, the investors will hear about it, and there's enough goodwill and enough really, really smart people in Singapore to be able to do it.
So I think most of them have covered quite important points, but I think I would just like to add one point. Healthcare as a business, it can never be local. It has to be a global business. And the days of thinking a Singaporean company becoming a unicorn or a Singaporean company going global, it's actually a matter of pride, right? When somebody goes global, it's a good thing for investors because they start seeing it's opening up new avenues. But where does the base sit? Yes, that's the question. Is always the case, right? So is it Singapore, is it US, or it's wherever it is. Some experiences that I had was very similar to what you mentioned. You need to be an American company. You need to be a European company to get access to the funds from US or Europe. And something that always used to be in my mind is, yes, I can be an American company. I can be a European company. All you need is me having an office in America or even having an office in Europe. Is that very difficult? Not really, right? You can open up a subsidiary in the US or Europe whenever you want. But investors, they don't even look at your pitch most of the times because you're not an American company. And because they have others just around the block that they can sit on the boards of, and they can sit with the founders and make recommendations what to do, what not to do. So to your point, how does a startup founder at least get access to the resources in Singapore? I look at it as a single line with multiple dots in it, right? You have to start somewhere, just get one dot and connect all the dots, and automatically, one thing I've learned in the first 2 years of Biosciences is everybody's willing to help in Singapore, which is actually a big strength, right? If you go to Boston, you go to New York, there will be founders of different companies. They will say, I'm raising $100 million. I'm very busy with it, right? But in Singapore, I've actually seen the other way around, is that every biotech CEO, they actually talk to each other every now and then. All you have to do is ask. You have to just know the right question. And I think that's a very important thing to learn from the journey that I took. And automatically, you start getting the resources. You start going and talking to Enterprise Singapore. You start going and talking to EDBI. You start going and talking to Heritas. Because they know you are there, they have been very kind in at least connecting the dots to different people. So I would just say, before you even go to a meeting, come to events like SG Innovate and communicate with people. I cannot emphasize how important it is to get the right question first rather than finding the right answer. So as long as you know what you want, you will find it if you ask the right question to the right people.
So I think for me, if I look at the local ecosystem from startup creation perspective, I do not think funding is the only issue, or it's just the issue. Because if it's so, then it will be a simple problem to solve, right? The way I think about it is funding plus the talent we have, right? I would say that the depth and the breadth of it, and I will relative it to Silicon Valley, right? And the way you think about it here is that I think one good example I'd like to maybe mention here is that 3-4 years ago, we together with Temasek, we managed to convince Lightstone to set up a Singapore fund, right? With Ken being the local partners, and in that process, several companies were funded. But I think one of the feedback they given to us here is that, they see good assets in our research institute. The challenge for them is, even I find the good assets, how do I find the people in the local context to think about bringing those assets out of the research institute and start forming companies, right? You can find this kind of people very easily in the Silicon Valley, but not in some, at least in this part of the world. So that's the reason why that limits the amount of companies they can create it. Right. So one feedback that we got was from that perspective, and I would say that we do recognize that there can be more to be done, and in fact, I would say in the coming years, what we are from EDBI perspective are really looking at, as I mentioned earlier, EDBI invest probably Series A onwards, but on the seed stage, other than ESG seeds, the way we think about it is how do we look at working with experienced funds, perhaps invest in those funds, bring the experienced operators to really come to Singapore. And this will be people who perhaps with operation experience, who have a wide network of people. Of course, provided they can convince those executives maybe leaving the Bay Area to come over to Singapore and really jumpstart the companies, right? So if we can find more of these funds coming in, the way I think about it is really bringing, I would say, we're creating more startup. At the same time, actually, we are enlarging the pool of VCs in Singapore, right? And one going back to the thing here is that if you look at Singapore, one of the key hurdle is really the quality of innovation pipeline we have, So how do you bring, and I think government intervention is required to bring that in. The question is, what we want here is that as we improve the quality, right, what we want is to pass that to private VCs to really hand over and then run the company. So I think that's how we look at the landscape. Yeah.
Many thanks. I think some of the top questions have been somewhat addressed. If you're not satisfied, raise your hand, don't be shy. Because the next question, which we would like to summarize some of the ones up there, is the perception of risk, or better, the sensitivity to risk, which is very different around in this panel, I guarantee. And so there was a question regarding moonshots, pharma, therapeutics versus technologies versus digital health. They all have a different risk-return ratio, but also they are different in terms of psychological approach or practical approach. So can you share your perception of risk? Which goes also, sorry, in question number 2. In the past, when dinosaurs were roaming Earth and I started, VCs would fund preclinical stuff. Now you better have something in humans before getting into the Series A, in most cases, not all of them. So again, your perception of risk. We started with Vishal.
Oh, me? Yes. Okay, all right. Well, healthcare is about risk, right? Anyone who says, who wants to make a safe investments in healthcare is lying to himself, right? And it all comes down to all the things that we just spoke about. To my definition of how I look at risk in drug development, in therapeutics, a lot of money is going in, but not a lot of innovation is coming out. What I mean by that is, if you look at the dollars that have been spent over the last 5 years or 7 years, just in oncology, for an example, the annual spend is $150 billion. 2017, you had 11.8% success rate on drugs. Now it's 8.1%. Someone told me in the morning it's 4%. So you think there's billions and billions of dollars that are going in there, but you only get 8% success out of it. And what the patients are ultimately paying for is the failure, not the success. So the key question that I think I would actually ask a counter point to it is, it's not about risk, it's about de-risking it, right? And that's how I look at risk. Right? It's looking at drug development and de-risking, and God has given us brains, everybody has it, but oftentimes actually you sit in big pharma companies' board meetings, you will see that in 2015 and 2017, the strategy changes. And all the money that has been pumped in for 2 to 3 years, that will get reallocated to some different modality, some different therapeutics, some different companies, and so on and so on. So what is happening with that is it's making it look as if the drug development scenario is very risky. But long behold, if you look what is happening in the industry, and I think that's where I mentioned about democratizing, decentralizing, and de-risking. You look at Merck, just today in the morning, they just made an announcement that they are spinning off new cos. You look at Takeda, they are looking at doing more with less. You look at big pharma companies, everybody is realizing. And if I can use this platform to actually say something on that risk aspect, I actually feel by 2035, there is not going to be a big pharma company. Because there will be small pockets of companies within big pharma companies where they will have their own decentralized mechanism, and that's where the risk will be minimized, because as human beings, when you start focusing on what you're good at, rather than focusing on 30,000 people or 50,000 people, that is going to reduce the risk in drug development. I think that's how I look at risk, is decentralizing and de-risking and democratizing the R&D part.
I would say the way we think about it, and it's very broadly speaking, I totally agree with you. There's no such thing as risk-free aspect of our business. Just about everything can go wrong. equally everything can go right. And what I mean by that is when we started thinking about how we're going to run the company and really thinking about the execution plan, we literally map out all the things that can go wrong, all the different risks that at that point we could describe. And then we were thinking long and hard how we're going to manage it, how we can mitigate it. Are there better ways of doing things? Are they, maybe we should get better people, different caliber of people. So it starts with, for us, it starts with being aware that all those risks exist. And equally, every time we do speak to investors, we have those open conversations saying, we are fully aware that so many things is kind of on a scale of the risk-reward, which we would much rather have it map out, understand how we manage it, and really, as the day goes and the new developments are coming up, new regulatory frameworks are coming up, new business models are coming up, we see how we can leverage new approaches to mitigating the risks that we already know exist. So I also say when people ask me, why would I go into healthcare, one of the craziest spaces there are, I'm saying that's exactly for that reason, because I also think it attracts certain kind of people that I'm very comfortable with, and I like the risk that we're taking because we're taking it for the right reasons. So are they risks? 100%. Can we mitigate them? Yes. Can we mitigate them fully? No. So just be aware of it and mitigate the best and manage the best you can.
Yeah, just a quick point of view. I mean, you break down the risks, right? Actually, there's the scientific risk, right? The tech risk, and then the regulatory risk, and ultimately the commercialization risk. So this is like the life cycle of a drug development, right? You can develop the drug, and ultimately if you can't sell, and we don't have confidence for all three stages, then there's no point putting in the initial dollar, right? As an investor, it's cash in and cash out. That's what we need to think about. Because in between, there could be so many things happening. If we put the cash in, it's because we see reasons of confidence for traveling this whole journey, right? It's not part one of the journey, not just part two of the journey. We got to think even the entire 5-10 years that we sort of get enough confidence that, okay, this is something, it's a goal. I like the way it was put. Really, there is no slam dunk, okay, in investing in this space. Really, there isn't, but there is a difference in whether you can articulate your reasons to believe or not, right? A word about healthcare. I mean, as an investor, we are not pure biotech fund, right? So we invest in biotech as part of actually portfolio diversification. So we may invest in 10 deals, all right? And some of them could be in digital health. Some of them could be in healthcare service like hospital and with visible earnings and growth, right? Growth capital type. And then the biotech, unfortunately, many people see it as it's a binary play, right? Binary means either it's 1 or it's 0, right? Yeah, so 0 is very scary, right? I mean, if you put money in any of the STI index stock, maybe you lose 10-20%, okay? That is roughly it, right? Every year you might get dividend if you're lucky, right? But for biotech, it can become like maybe 5x or 10x, or it could be 0. And for investors, 0 is a scary thing, right? Because it's like wiping out your capital. You think about facing your investor and they ask you, what happened? Right? And you, oh my, you know, it's like getting 0 marks in the exam, right? It's like, what happened? How did you do this, right? You get 0 marks, right? Or, you know, so for us, we also got to think the portfolio construction. How do we build a diversified portfolio? And to be very honest, the way, you know, we think about it is, okay, I put a portion of our investments into biotech. We like to believe we choose very selectively the best we could find. And if these things tank, right, if this investment really becomes 0, then we are praying or hoping that the rest of the more steady investments will be able to cover the losses in biotech. Honest truth, right? So from a portfolio diversification, then it takes the thinking to a different level, right? That we are prepared to accept a binary outcome. Now, within the biotech space, of course, there's also discussion on, do you invest in platform companies or you invest in companies with, you know, the single assets, right? because the discussion goes that if you are in a platform, you could generate a number of candidates, and if one fail, the rest, you still got a chance, right? So things like that, I wouldn't go too much into it to bore you, but there are various mitigations and people can think of, like for example, what sort of validation has this technology or this product been going through, and so on and so forth.
I think this is a very interesting question, because I think yesterday I was talking to Florence about this, right? Sharing my view. If I think about the drug development risk, the way I would put it is like you think about failure rate, cost, and time, right? And if you look at the past 10 years, right, the failure rate actually didn't really reduce that much, despite all of the advance we have, right? Cost-wise, cost to conduct clinical trial continue to increase. And then time-wise, I don't see a big difference. You still take about 10 years from preclinical to really all the way to approval. And despite that, if you look at it, you look at the stock for biotech in the last 10 years, increased by 500%. So risk didn't change, returns increases. From an investor perspective, before even it hit the public market, I look at it, valuation across all stage A to whatever increases, right? And then another statistic if you want to look at here is, I think in the last few years, all the biotech companies, almost 60+% of the biotech companies didn't perform above IPO price. So you think about all this data point, what does it tell you? The way I'm thinking here is that you think about risk didn't change, but what has changed is really the valuation and how, I would say, investors perceive risk versus returns. Of course, you can say we're in an era where there's so much advances, there's new mobility, modality coming out, pharma are spending big money buying companies, and all this drive out the valuation sentiment. But biggest question I have here is that, if I relate back to what we are seeing in the tech world, you think about the WeWork moment. It caused everyone downstream to really rethink about how do you perceive risk and how you adjust your returns, right? And I would worry that, and I'm watching out for, there'll be a WeWork moment in the biotech world as well. Yeah.
Thank you for your very deep insights. Any questions from the audience? Don't be shy. There is a lot there, but what about a hand raised? We don't bite?
I have a question.
You're not the audience. Come on.
I would like to ask a question. So we've been discussing all the different things that can go wrong, and all the struggles that we go through daily, which I think everybody has. It doesn't matter whether you're in this space or you're in any other industries. You have days when they're amazing, and you have days when you're just hitting your head on the wall, and you're thinking, is that what it is? But then you just don't stop and carry on. So I wanted to ask my fellow panelists, what is it that you really enjoy about your work?
Well, for me, I enjoy meeting dynamic entrepreneurs like you guys, and learning what you're doing, what you're seeing. I enjoy meeting fellow investors, what they are seeing and what they are doing, and that keeps me alive and young, because actually the world changes very fast with all this tech disruption and also innovations in the biotech world. And of course, we all take personal interest in health, right? Education, health, tech, it impact our life, impact our families, and so on and so forth. So to me, that is what keeps me going, even in difficult days when there are a lot of challenges in the investments.
So we're like an anti-aging. I love that.
For me, it can all sum in one word. It's the hope, right? The fact that we are in healthcare, we're trying to do something meaningful over here. It's just the hope that you could have the next CAR T, you could have the next cell and gene therapy, you could have the next small molecule. It might not be yours, but it could be yours, right? And my God, if it happens that way, that's happiest day of your life. In fact, a very small story. When me and my co-founder, we started this company, we both are from India. We have our background. I was born in India. He was born in Kenya, but he has Indian roots. And we were looking at and when we met the Indian government to the early stages of the company, there was a very interesting data point that came up. The last drug approved in India that actually was commercialized outside of India was in 1950s. And that was for hypertension. And the reason why we know about it, because my co-founder's father used to take that drug. So that tells you how long and arduous this journey really is, and that hope is what drives me. And if there is one thing that any entrepreneur or any healthcare, does not matter if it's biotech or CRO or anyone else, that is what it drives it. And that's what keeps me awake at night. Of course, quality also keeps me awake at night. Some patient getting drugged somewhere or the other and doesn't die in the clinical trial, that of course keeps me awake at night. But just that hope, that's probably the biggest thing.
Well, I think from the investor perspective, I think very much agree what you actually have mentioned. I think earlier I also want to mention that EDBI invests broadly tech and healthcare. And the reason here is, and if you think about tech, you make quick returns, right? Versus healthcare, which is typical long gestation. But why we still want to make healthcare investment, I think primarily is meaningful. I mean, it really impacts life, right? From an investor point of view, investing in highly quality entrepreneurs who are developing drugs for the world, making an impact, that's important. And I would say from an EDBI perspective, the way we think about it, we are EDBI being, I would say, one of the many local actors. I like the fact that we're part of this movement to actually bring up the ecosystem in Singapore. Right?
It's hard to think of better words to summarize this meeting. It is working together, it is dreaming together, it is making it worth, regardless of failures. It's to rise, fall, rise again, survive, win, for everybody, not just for ourselves. So it's right on the dot. The last question I want to address is very simple. Yes, of course, our contacts are available. Just ask the same email or contact you had, and we will be very happy, I guess, if I may, to share and talk more with you. If there is nothing else burning, I would like to close with these beautiful sentences and idea of togetherness. Thank you for your help.